Randy Robison of Life Today TV. I'm here with Jay Richards, who is the co-author of the book Indivisible with my dad. And I should tell you that if you know my dad, he's a longtime Protestant, formerly tied heavily with Southern Baptist churches, preacher. And Jay is a Catholic. And so we're here to talk about the coordination and difficulties of Catholics and Protestants working together. Jay, thanks for talking about this kind of sensitive subject with some people.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. It's great to be with you.
And just kind of tell us your background a little bit, because I know you haven't always been Catholic.
No, that's right. In fact, I'm originally from Texas and grew up in a kind of mainline Presbyterian church, and longtime evangelical, well into adulthood, and really just became Catholic several years ago, very much as an adult. And as a Protestant, really an evangelical becoming Catholic, I mean, I didn't perceive it as it's like I changed religions. I felt like I was brought everything with me when I became Catholic.
You weren't raised in the Southern Baptist Church.
No.
I was, where we were taught that Catholicism was a cult.
That's for a lot of us. That was, I mean, there were Protestants said that about Catholics, and Catholics have said that about Protestants. Now, in the case of Catholics, the Catechism specifically says no Protestants are Christians. In fact, the Catholics call Protestants separated brethren. But this is, something that is really new, I'd say, in the last couple of decades. Because if you read just the history of the United States, I mean, in political debates in the 19th century, there were concerns that Protestants had when Catholics started immigrating from Ireland and they had Catholic schools, worried that these Catholic kids were going to be, agents of the Pope or something like that, or they'd end up criminals. And we talk about this a good bit, actually, in the book Indivisible, because James and I are convinced that now more than ever, Catholics and Protestants, especially strong believing Catholics and believing evangelicals, need to be working together. And it's not just a sort of marriage of convenience because we agree with each other on the question of abortion or marriage. But frankly, we believe there's a lot of stuff that we hold in common, not just political views or moral views, but there's a lot of basic theological beliefs that we share despite our continuing doctrinal disagreements. And we think that it's important, especially in this day and age, that we be building on those things that we share in common.
Is there not a level of compromise that must take place in working with someone who has, such different beliefs? And because Protestants, we don't view the Pope as the head of the church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of those things, of course, on which Protestants and Catholics disagree. And so the way I would answer it is that, of course, there's always some folks that believe that unless two people agree down the line on everything, then there's a compromise in working with that other person. I don't believe that. I don't think James obviously doesn't believe that either. What we think is that there's enough fundamental beliefs that we hold in common that despite our disagreements over things like the authority of the Pope, we have everything we need in terms of what we agree on to be able to make, I think, a strong public witness, certainly in the public square and in politics. I mean, it's not as if our differing views on Mary or something like that weigh directly on our views on marriage or the life issue. In fact, whether you're Catholic or Protestant, you believe God created the world and He created human beings in His image, so every life is precious. We believe that as Catholics, and Protestants believe that, so that's not a point of disagreement. And what I find is, despite some really important doctrinal disagreements between Protestants and Catholics, those things that we agree on provide more than enough stable base for building, I think, a public witness and public profile in the public square.
Specifically, what are those things we believe in that you find foundational?
Yeah, I mean, that first one, which I mentioned a minute ago, is this belief in the intrinsic value and dignity of every human being. We don't believe that people have value just depending on what they can do for society. We think everybody, because they're created in the image of God, has value just simply by virtue of being human. Every faithful Catholic believes that, and every Bible-believing evangelical believes that. But how did we discover it? We didn't discover it by getting together and talking about these things. What happened is that the culture got more and more pagan and more secular. And conservative evangelicals and conservative Catholics met each other in prayer vigils and protests outside Planned Parenthoods. You know, we had the same thing happened among Protestants. You know, you had a Presbyterian that never would have, you know, been caught dead with a Methodist at one point, discovering that he had a lot more in common with this Methodist than he did with his liberal Presbyterian brethren that were sitting in the same pew. And so I think what's really important is that we distinguish these fundamental doctrines, these fundamental truths and principles that we agree on, and build on those. And that doesn't mean that we dismiss and say, well, these things we disagree on are unimportant. That doesn't mean that at all. We could still have strong convictions on those things. It's just that what we want to do is we want to build on those things in which we agree, and that does not require that we compromise on those things in which we disagree.
Is this only valid when you're talking about social change or political change or the things that impacting national policy, or is there maybe some common ground that could be used to further the gospel?
Well, I think so. I mean, certainly the stuff that we write about in Indivisible primarily has to do with those things that we're facing as a country. But we don't just argue that, well, let's kind of come up with a list of policy positions and say, hey, you know, let's just sort of check the list. James and I believe that the Holy Spirit is calling all Christians at this time to a higher form of unity, to a spiritual unity, in spite of and recognizing the fact that we have doctrinal institutional divisions that aren't going to go away anytime soon. I mean, I certainly have no idea how Christians would all suddenly have institutional unity. I have no idea. It would require some dictatorship, right, forcing us all to do it. We're not going to do that. But nevertheless, if you read what Jesus prayed on the night he was betrayed, John 17, he prays specifically for the unity of his followers. And he says that their unity is how people are going to recognize who they are. And so I think despite our divisions, we need to be looking for ways to build on the unity that we know God actually wants. What's interesting is that if you look at what's happened in American history from the time of the founding to the present, whether you're dealing with education, you're dealing with God in public schools, divisions among different Christians has actually helped contribute to some of the things that we'd otherwise blame on secularism. What's happened is that Christians have been fighting amongst ourselves. Secularists have actually acted in remarkable concert in unity, and I think all of us are suffering as a result of that.
Great. Be sure to check out Indivisible, written by my dad and Jay Richards, and you'll see a little bit of that unity that Jay's talking about. And I appreciate a few minutes of your time. And don't miss Jay when he's on Life Today. That's available at lifetoday.org, so check it out there. Thanks again.